Hey guys, today we're going to finish up our series we're calling Counterculture. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 6 and we're going to conclude our study. I know there are some more chapters after chapter 6, but this is the end of Daniel's life and the end of his story for us in this series. Last week we talked about King Belshazzar and how he openly disrespected God by taking some things out of the temple of God and using them for his own selfishness and to glorify and praise false gods and idols. And he openly disrespected God, and God did not stand for it. And at the end of our chapter, King Belshazzar lost his life, and the Babylonians were overtaken by King Darius and the Medes. And so we talked about how our culture has openly disrespected God, and so we need to be ambassadors for Christ, to be his hands and his feet, to stand and proclaim what Christ has done for us, and to live our lives in a way that shows that God is, his presence is living in us and can be a very real presence in the life of our culture. See, Daniel has had such an interesting journey. His life had been completely changed over and over, and he constantly had his faith challenged. As we look at one final chapter of the life of Daniel, we can see that Daniel soon was going to face the lions. And that's the title of our lesson today, our message today, is that we're going to face the lions. Or what do you do when you face the lions? See, what do you do when people maliciously use you? What do you do when you find yourself in a place where you have to make a very difficult choice? Our culture seems to force Christians to choose between living their way or living for God. So what do you do when you face these lions? Let's check out Daniel's story and see what he decided to do. So in verse 1, we see that Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces, and he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 other administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Verse 3, Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. Because of Daniel's great ability, the king had made plans to place him over the entire empire. Now, I want you to just stop for a minute. Daniel lived his life with honor, faithfulness, and God blessed him. Think about where Daniel came from in chapter 1. Daniel was just a teenage boy when the Babylonians came and sacked Jerusalem and Judah and took him away from everyone he had ever known and everything he had ever, his comfort, his home, his family, everything, and brought him into a strange land. And Daniel, over and over, was faithful to God. He was reliable and held his honor, and he impressed king after king. And you get to the point that a conquered slave now was going to be placed over an entire empire. Not just the Babylonian Empire, but now a brand new empire, the Medes and the Persians. All of these people were going to come to Daniel before they had to go to the king. Now, how do you think all of the advisors to the king who had been with him already, had been with him for a long time, now looked at this slave who is now going to be second in command? How do you think they felt? So we look at verse 4. It says that these other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs, but they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. See, they were jealous of Daniel. And now they got to a point where we've got to get rid of Daniel. We've got to find some fault in Daniel. And this is my first point. We need to live our lives so faithfully, so trustworthy, so with honor and respect that people have no choice but only to attack our faith because they cannot find faults in us. See, he earned the respect of yet another king. And because of this, the king planned to make him ruler only second to him. The others were so jealous of Daniel, they sought ways to find fault in him. It says that they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. In your life, can people count on you? Are you completely trustworthy? Are you faithful, responsible at work, at school, to your parents, at church, wherever you are, do your friends know they can rely on you? Are you trustworthy? That's the kind of people that we need to be in this culture if we're going to reach them for the gospel. When it comes to facing lions of our culture, we have to live our lives faithfully, responsibly, and trustworthy. We cannot give the enemy any ammunition against us. See, they are constantly looking and waiting for a Christian to make a wrong move, say the wrong thing, or do the wrong thing. Because when that happens, they will pounce and shout to the world, see, I told you these Christians were not who they say they are or who they claim to be. It just takes one moment of weakness, one sin, for them to use that against you. See, God is all about redeeming you, giving you second chances, taking your failures and showing Himself glorious through it, and you giving Him glory through your failures. Over and over throughout Scripture, we see that God takes those who have failed, those who have sinned, David, Peter, and He uses them to do great things. But yet, the world is not that way. Our culture does not give you a second chance. Our culture does not allow you to do something after, or to have any kind of platform if you fall. I've seen so many youth pastors over the years who have given in to temptation and done things they shouldn't have done, and it ruined their ministry. Pastors who have made a choice to do something that not only just ruined their ministry, but it ruined their family and it ruined their marriage, all because of a moment of weakness. Now, can God redeem them and use them? The answer is yes. Will culture ever trust them? The answer is probably no, because they failed. Now, see, Peter in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says this, "Be sober, be vigilant. Your adversary, the devil, walks around like a lion, seeking whom he may devour." I'm not saying that you live a mistake-free life, but I'm saying live a life that earns the respect of those around you. So if you do fall, they will understand and be there to help you. If you look later on in this story of chapter 6, at verse 14, the king learns that Daniel was guilty of breaking a law. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. And so hearing this, verse 14, it says, the king was deeply troubled and he tried to think of a way to save Daniel. Even after Daniel had broken his law, he still had the respect of Daniel and wanted to help Daniel out. And that's how we need to be in our culture. If we're going to face lions, we need to earn the respect of the lions that we face, so that if we do fail, if we do fall into temptation, that we can try to redeem ourselves because of who we were. Now, as we look back at verse 5, we see the only way these jealous men could find any way to attack Daniel was with his die-hard faith in his God. Look at what they say. So our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel would be in his connection with the rulers of his religion, or the rules of his religion. That's my next point here. Or we're going to get to that in just a second. They devised a way to get rid of Daniel by tricking the king into signing a law that for 30 days no one could pray to anyone or any god other than the king. And if they did, they would be thrown into the lion's den. And the king agreed to do so, and so he signed that as law and made a decree. And they could not change that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians. And so this brings me to my next point here. When it comes to making a choice whether or not to live for God, live for God. So Daniel, when he heard this law, went home, knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open towards Jerusalem, and he prayed 3 times a day, just as he did before. See, Daniel didn't change anything when he heard this law, this decree that he was not allowed to pray to his God. Yet, he didn't care. Who was more important to him? His God. Who had been with him this entire time? Through 3 kings, through the fiery furnace, through everything, dreams and everything, the face of peril, the face of death. Who was with him the entire time? God was. Now, Daniel refused to quit living for God, praying to God despite what it could mean. Daniel gave thanks to God while the men who were jealous of him went to the king and told him of Daniel's defiance. As we saw earlier, the king, instead of being furious, was heartbroken. This is because Daniel earned the respect of the king. He was trustworthy and reliable. So he tried everything he could to save Daniel, but ultimately had to have him thrown to the lions in the lion's den. We see this. It says, so at last, verse 16, the king gave orders for Daniel to be arrested and thrown into the den of lions. And the king said to him, as he was being thrown in, may your God, whom you serve so faithfully, rescue you. If our faith is challenged, we have to continue to trust God. When we come face to face with lions, we have to remain faithful to God. What would you do in this situation? I hope that you would continue to pray, continue to be faithful, even if it meant your very life. So I'm going to get to my last point here. When you have to face the lions, remember God is with you. Verse 17 through 28, we see the rest of the story. The king had a stone placed over the lion's den with a royal seal so no one could rescue him. Verse 17, so then the king returned to his palace, but he says that he was so distraught, he was so worried, he was so upset that he couldn't sleep. He didn't want to have anybody to come in and try to help him. It says that he refused his usual entertainment, couldn't sleep all that night. It says very early the next morning, he ran to the lion's den and he called out when he got there in anguish, Daniel, servant of the living God, was your God whom you serve so faithfully, able to rescue you from the lion's den. I love that. And look at the response of Daniel. First of all, there is a response. So that should tell you everything that you need to know about this story. Daniel, his answer is incredible. He calls out, long live the king. My God has sent his angel to shut the lions' mouths so they would not hurt me. For I have been found innocent in his sight, and I have not wronged you, your majesty. In everything Daniel had done, he was found faithful, not only to God, but to the king as well. Whenever you face the lions of this world, remember God is with you. Remain faithful. No matter how hard it gets, no matter who tries to maliciously use you, no matter who is jealous of you, or no matter how difficult things may be, we have got to remain faithful to God, and God will be at our side. God will be with us. The chapter ends with Daniel's accusers being thrown into the lion's den. This time, the lions were very hungry and devoured them. Where God had shut the mouths of the lions for Daniel, God had opened them back up for Daniel's accusers. See, if we live in this culture, if the culture is going to disrespect God and get to the point where they're going to challenge and they're going to try to manipulate and maliciously get rid of God's chosen, God's people, then it's going to come to a point where God is going to allow their destruction to come. And it's not going to be at our hands, but it is going to be at the hands of God. And I've read the end of the story, and anyone that is not on God's side, it's not going to end very well for them. See, Daniel's king praised his God once more. In our culture, we must remain faithful no matter what happens. Will you stay faithful when you face the lions? That's the real question. See, our culture is one that openly defies and disrespects God. We must stay faithful, and I hope you've seen this overwhelming theme throughout the life of Daniel, of staying faithful despite what happens in your life. And God continues to bless Daniel, and God is continually there with him. We see at the end of this, it says, so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius, the reign of Cyrus the Persian. It says that Daniel's God was given praise by the king of the Medes and the Persians. Look at what the king says. For he is the living God, and he will endure forever. His kingdom will never be destroyed. His rule will never end. He rescues and saves his people. He performs miraculous signs and wonders in the heavens and on earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of lions. Again, another king here, because of the faithfulness of Daniel, is giving God the glory and honor that he deserves. So will you stay faithful when you face your lions? That's the question. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this study in the book of Daniel. Next week, we're going to start a brand new series. We finished up counterculture, and we're going to look at a new study. But In the meantime, if you have any questions about the book of Daniel, if you have any questions about our culture and facing our culture and how we can stay faithful and remain pure and holy in the midst of all the chaos and the nonsense and the disrespectfulness that this culture has to offer and the temptations that come with it, send me a message. Let's talk about it. Let me pray with you. Let me discuss this with you. Let me just help you in any way that I can. And I pray that if you have not been going through this, you can go back to the previous videos on our channel here and look at parts 1 through 5 if you've not watched them already, and kind of look at them and go through this study yourself as you understand what it means to face the lions in this current culture and how to live a life that is counter to the culture that is being presented. Thanks for watching. We'll see you guys next week.